Marshall Shepard is a professor of geography at the University of Georgia. He worked for NASA on satellite missions studying weather and climate for 12 years and was the 2013 president of the American Meteorological Society. What's the difference between weather and climate?
We'll often hear people define climate as average weather. That's one part of it, but climate is more than just average. It's just things like extremes of frequency and how often things are occurring. So one of the ways that I like to describe weather and climate is that weather is your mood and climate is your personality. On any given day, our mood doesn't tell us anything about our long-term personality.
What are the clearest signs of climate change where you live?
One of the interesting things is that climate change affects us locally. It's not something off in the future. We're starting to see some things happening now. The IPCC and the U.S. National Climate Assessment are showing us that the top 1% of rainfall events are heavier than ever. Here in Atlanta, Georgia in 2009, we had a record flood event, a 500-year, even a 1,000-year and beyond flood event. That likely had some climate change signal in it. The fact that we are seeing in the southern Appalachians, even in parts of Georgia, we're seeing changes in migration patterns of birds and other species. As I often say, the animals know. I mean, we can debate about temperature trends and lines, but nature knows.
What's the evidence that humans are causing today's climate change?
In terms of our recent ice age, we actually should be in a period of cooling, but we saw a dramatic increase in warming after the Industrial Revolution as we started to learn how to burn fossil fuels. And so how do we kind of know that there's a human signature? If you look at the last 400,000 years or so using paleoclimate records, things like ice cores, for example, there was a natural variability in CO2 and a related temperature trend as well, but it never exceeded a certain boundary or cap. From 1850 onward, we're well outside of that natural bound. It's like a baseball player. I mean, we know that baseball players naturally hit home runs. And I can't say that a baseball player cannot hit a home run naturally, but during the era of steroids or performance-enhancing drugs, we know that there is an increased influence of that human signature on natural home run length and frequency. And that's kind of how I think about the human influence on the natural cycle and climate.
What are the key risks of climate change for the United States?
Yeah, for the U.S., I mean, I worry about the fact that weather and climate has a significant impact on public health, our economy, and national security. As we saw with the drought of 2012, grains, corns could not make it down the Mississippi River to market. We saw a spike in prices, what I call weather or climate inflation, because of the fact that these basic staples of almost everything that we eat were not making it to market. In addition, we're seeing diseases in places we haven't seen diseases before. As a father of a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, I worry about them having to deal with exotic diseases that we didn't have to think about in our lifetime here in the United States.
What can the scientific community contribute to the debate about climate change?
The interesting thing is that 97% of people who actually study weather and climate science are in consensus on the fact that there's something happening with our climate. And so that's an important thing for us to continue to emphasize, because I think to the public, there's this notion that there's quite a bit of disagreement among the science. And in fact, you have quite a few people speaking out, scientists from other disciplines, politicians, radio spokespersons, but as I often tell my wife, you know, if I have a pain in my chest, I'm not going to go see my eye doctor. So we actually have to consume information from people that we have valued as experts on these topics.
When you testify before Congress, what do you hope to convey?
I simply put it this way: if 97% of engineers told me that airplane I'm about to get on is going down, I'm not getting on it.
When people ask, do you believe in climate change? How do you respond?
My kids believe in the tooth fairy, or right now my son believes in Santa Claus. Climate change is a real science. It's almost like asking, do I believe that I have the flu if the doctor diagnosed me with the flu? I mean, that's a real occurrence that's happening in my body, and I think weather and climate change is the same way. One of the metrics of success is when that question goes away, do you believe in climate change? And we start seeing questions, what can we do about this climate change?
Are extreme weather and climate change connected?
Think of climate change like a card game. And think of every time you draw an ace, you'll get a storm like Superstorm Sandy. Climate change is essentially adding an extra ace to the deck. So are we increasing the risk or probability of an extreme event through climate change? I think the answer to that is likely yes, based on the scientific literature. Also, with a storm like Superstorm Sandy, if Sandy had occurred 100 years ago, it would have had about 7 to 8 inches less sea level to inundate the New Jersey or New York coast. So I think we're seeing these residual impacts of climate change and rising sea level that make a rather pedestrian storm a deadly storm. At the end of the day, Superstorm Sandy was a relatively weak hurricane. It was barely a Category 1 storm, yet look at the damage that it caused. So one of the things that I spend a great deal of time focusing on is that it doesn't take a Category 3 or 5 storm. Because of the changes that we're seeing in our system, increased populations and coastlines, we're quite vulnerable.
How does social media help or harm the discussion of climate change?
I often say that there are so many meteorologists and climatologists that now have their degrees from Twitter Tech or from Wikipedia University. There's so much information that's floating around out there that is framed as fact, and in fact, quite a bit of it is wrong. Well, the downside of ignorant interest in the topics is that actually can inform policy, and it can inform and shape public opinion, and I think we see that. I get in debates in grocery stores with yoga artists and my medical doctor and the guy that does my lawn about climate change, and he's debating me vigorously even though I've studied this and taught it for decades. And so there's a renewed level of confidence, but I said, boy, it's really interesting because I never see this same degree of debate and challenge if your doctor says you need to have a heart surgery. I mean, we don't see the same level of discourse with other experts, and it's really interesting. I think people feel that they know the weather, and so they're more comfortable speaking on it when it, in fact, is as complex as nuclear engineering or cardiology.
Climate change. It's all about the polar bears, right?
Climate change is not about polar bears. It's about your kids and my kids. It's about the price of Cheerios and cereal. It's about your health and whether you might have an increase in occurrence of heat stress this year because of increased heat in the system. So climate change is far more than just about polar bears. What I know is based on my knowledge of weather and climate. It's not a political issue. It's an issue of human beings, our kids, and their future.
How can the AAAS What We Know initiative contribute?
One of the things that's important for me to be a part of initiatives like the AAAS initiative or things that we're doing at AMS or otherwise is we've been on the sidelines too long as scientists. Information and public opinion is being shaped by lawyers, people skilled in communication, yet science colleagues often, in many cases, shy away from speaking to the public or to the media or are uncomfortable doing so. I think we've got to turn the tide. We have to get information out there that's scientifically rich and credible and communicate on the same playing field that people that have other interests are doing as well. That's why I believe there's so much misinformation out there on the climate change topic. The void in messaging has been being filled by people skilled in communicating it, while scientists, to some degree, have been on the sidelines.